Former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, In Defense of Democracy, with Anne-Marie Waters.
Good evening, everyone. This is Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. We do indeed have Anne-Marie Waters with us tonight by special pre-recorded broadcast, given that Anne-Marie is in the UK. And I'll launch that in a second. It was intended to be launched immediately, but due to the events in the last couple of days and the nature of tonight's programming, I wanted to make just a couple of comments. As we all know, there was an assassination attempt on a former president and the current presidential candidate. While this show is not political at all, and I'm a Baha'i, this also airs on a Baha'i channel, among many others. I want to emphasize that we are completely nonpartisan. We eschew partisan politics completely. However, public discourse is important. Discussion about issues that might help formulate opinions and even help us decide how to vote are in fact important. So I wanted to take a moment and read a prayer, a Baha'i prayer, specifically focused on this American democracy in advance of launching the pre-recorded show that we did with Anne-Marie. O thou kind Lord, this gathering is turning to thee. These hearts are radiant with thy love. These minds and spirits are exhilarated by the message of thy glad tidings. O God, let this American democracy become glorious in spiritual degrees, even as it has aspired to material degrees, and render this just government victorious. Confirm this revered nation to upraise the standard of the oneness of humanity, to promulgate the most great peace, to become thereby most glorious and praiseworthy among all the nations of the world. O God, this American nation is worthy of thy favors and is deserving of thy mercy. Make it precious and near to thee through thy bounty and bestowal. Without further ado, we'll launch into the pre-recorded show for tonight. And I'm the host of Created in the Image of God. Welcome to tonight's show, which is pre-recorded due to the time lag between our esteemed guest who hails from Great Britain. Now, this is a guest we've had on before, and we did a series of sneak peek mini interviews, which we recorded the night after the presidential debate between former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden. And we called it the morning after hangover. And we talked about the state of our democracy because our esteemed guest is a former British politician of some prominence who's had a lot of attention, both good and bad, for her stance. And the reason we have her on the show tonight, a special 4th of July episode, which is being recorded on the 3rd of July, is because her book, In Defense of Democracy, which was originally published in the election season of the prior election cycle before January 6th, she already wrote a book called In Defense of Democracy. And of course, that's become the rallying cry on all sides of everybody who wants to lead the United States in particular. They claim to be defending democracy. And I thought it was just incredibly prescient that this former British politician, who was a politician at the time she wrote the book, had announced the title of her book in that manner, in that way. And there's a release on July 4th of a paperback version and a Kindle version, which we anticipate may well have become a bestseller by the time this show airs, which is tonight on July 16th. So a long-winded introduction to set the stage for the appearance, again, of one of our most esteemed guests, Anne-Marie Waters. Welcome to the studio, Anne-Marie.
Oh, hi, Wade. Thank you. Thank you for those lovely words. You are very kind.
Well, you and I have known each other now for, I don't know, more than a decade, going on a decade.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact timing, but I feel like I've gotten to know you as a friend, and I really appreciate your perspective. I know that in recent months, you've been doing a lot of writing, more writing even than when you were authoring your first two books. Tell us what that shift is all about and why you are an ex-politician.
Well, I honestly, I don't think the world is quite ready for me. That's the truth. What I say is true, and I'm very obviously I offer opinions as well, but they're always based on things I know to be true. I'm a little bit. Sometimes I think I'm too much of a plain speaker for politics. I think that goes down better in America than it does in the UK. I think people in the UK are still a little bit shocked when you're blunt and plain speaking. So I am, for myself, really, gonna take a break. I feel like, especially as we have election day here tomorrow, it is looking very, very likely that we will get a Labour government, which is quite probably as far to the left as the Democrats are. Certainly very woke, and absolutely intending to open the borders even further. Always on the radical left on any issue. So they're going to become our government. And I think the country is going to go through a very difficult period. And perhaps at the end of that, it will be ready for my plain speaking. So for myself as a person, I want to step away for a while, concentrate on becoming a better writer, and a more broad, a more rounded person. I've been in politics all my adult life in one form or another. And when I realized that, I thought, I've got to step back and do something else with my life for a while, and find out a little bit more about who I am, away from the snake pit. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, there's so many thoughts going through my mind right now. First, however, allow me to level set a little bit for our audience as to why I have you on the show, which I'm very, very glad to be in. And I'm in no way caveating anything you're saying. I just want the audience to understand. So this is not a political show. This is a religious show. The show is titled Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. Of course, we're an American. Well, I'm in America, though born in Canada. I'm an American citizen. And in our Pledge of Allegiance, we have one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So the premise is God is involved in our nation, right? We are submissive to God. That's a basis that doesn't need explaining here in America, in my view, although you mentioned the liberal woke, which we'll get to in a moment. The other piece of that is that throughout the Bible, there are prophecies related to the end times and so-called eschatology. And again, you and I differ. I'm now presenting my views, my perspective, my platform. I'm not representing anything that Anne-Marie does or doesn't believe for the audience. However, those prophecies indicate a time when all the mountains will be leveled. And it is my view that the mountains mean governments. The governments will be leveled. It is my view that democracy was prophesied, that going way back to ancient Israel, when they were told to not want a king, that they should not want a king to be like the nations around them. Part of that is God wants us to be sovereign under him, and therefore we are allowed and encouraged to have government by the people, for the people. Mm-hmm. So that's why we're having this discussion on this show, first of all, and it will go many directions from here, which I'm very glad about. The second thing I wanted to mention is a question. You mentioned that we're going to probably have a Labour government in England. And again, we are absolutely not involved in partisan politics. I am not here to try to sway anybody's vote one way or the other. I'm here to provide information and hopefully provoke thought so people can come to their own conclusion. Having said all that, there is a wave right now that has been slowly brewing under, the swells out in the deep ocean have begun to rise. And we see it in France, for example, with Marine Le Pen, right? So why, after that shifting ground, causing us groundswell, maybe a future tsunami, why is Britain electing a Labour? What is going on in the hearts and minds of the Brits here as we enter the 4th of July season here on this rebel colonies territory?
Well, we have had 14 years of the Conservative Party in power. And our system, we have a first past the post voting system, which the rest of Europe does not have. They have some form of proportional representation. We have first past the post, which means only one person wins each seat. We have two dominant parties, the Conservatives and Labour. And there are smaller parties, but they tend not to do well because people who are Conservative supporters or who don't like Labour will vote Conservatives to keep Labour out, and vice versa. Our system is very different. This is why we get stuck when the rest of Europe moves on.
So it's not a two-party system, but it sort of behaves a little bit like one.
The first past the post has essentially made it one. The two biggest parties in the country are the ones that people have been voting for generations and generations, and that hasn't changed. So it's either Labour or Conservative all the time. It's a bit, I mean, yours is pretty similar.
Right.
But
we've got a third-party candidate this year that few people are talking about, who,
Robert Kennedy,
other than how he might spoil this person's chances or the other person's chances.
I heard he said, my biggest obstacle is people think I can't win. That's why they don't vote for me. And so the idea that you can't win stops people voting. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? I quite like him. I think he's very interesting. But it's a similar thing. Other people just don't break through because people don't vote for them because they think, well, if I vote for them, it's going to be a waste of my vote. And it's a circular logic which keeps good people out. It's difficult, but as for, you're right about the rest of Europe. France is going in an incredible direction. I mean, what's happening in France is amazing. And I do think that if she keeps the momentum going now, she will. It's unfortunately a few years away, but if she can do well in Parliament, she now has control of the French Parliament, Marine Le Pen. If she can do well there, she's got a big chance of taking the big job in a few years' time, which is, of course, President of France. But the rioting has already broke out. Paris is chaos in Paris, with people protesting against her victory. We have some issues here in the UK when Labour is going to win, but you've got this rise of Nigel Farage, who is seen as far right. He isn't. He's actually quite soft in my view. He's not as right wing as I am on some issues. But even someone as mild as him, seeing his popularity has caused outrage on the left in the UK. Of course, you've got the Netherlands, Geert Wilders, the anti-Islam, fiercely anti-Islam Geert Wilders. He won the Dutch elections last year, and they've been trying to form a government ever since. They don't want him to be prime minister, even though he should be, because he has the biggest party. So now they're dealing with all sorts of coalition agreements, but the right is winning on the continent. But here on the little islands off the edge of the continent, things are going to the left instead, which is an anomaly.
Well, let me shift the conversation a little bit away from left and right towards truth, something that you brought up and speaking directly. Yeah. So while you were saying that, I was thinking and reflecting that it almost sounded like your position is that in order to be a successful politician, and you chose successful, not good, right? Because good would be somebody who actually does good for the people, right? But to be a successful politician, you have to be an adept liar. That's what I was hearing. Yes,
you do. You really do. This is something that I had an almost personal experiment with in politics. Can you succeed in politics while telling the truth? The answer is no, you can't. You really,
so it's interesting that in the debate here in America, there was a lot of mudslinging around one candidate in particular being a liar and every other word being a lie. And of course, if you dig in a little bit deeper, one could also argue that everything the other person was saying was an untruth as well. And neither of them were really talking in a way that could be fact checked, because they weren't really relying on facts. They were making sweeping statements, characterizations. Whenever there was a fact thrown out, it was probably wrong because they weren't really paying attention to facts. And I don't know that the specific facts in a debate like that are so relevant. I don't really know how we work that in a system. What's your thought on that debate generally? Not in terms of candidate performance, but the purpose and the function of a debate, and did it accomplish anything good?
I've been surprised by the debates overall. You know, the Republican primaries were interesting as well to watch. It's my job to write about American politics, so I have to watch these things. I probably would anyway, but the one between Biden and Trump there were no policy. There was very little policy in it. It was attacking each other as liars, like you say. Both of them were the biggest liars that have ever stood. Both of them were the worst presidents in the history of the United States. Both of them had the worst economy in the history of the United States. Both of them were the worst and the best at treating the military in the history of the United States. You know, it's absurd. And when someone continually says, I am the best in the history of America, no, they lose all credibility, don't they? You almost sort of start laughing at them. And think, well, these two men are competing to be the leader of the free world, and I'm not hearing from them anything other than mudslinging and boasting. I mean, Trump is a notorious boaster anyway, so it's almost endearing, but it's not necessarily what you want. It signifies a little bit of self-doubt in my mind, but regardless, I suppose we all have self-doubt. But it's not the caliber. And I say the same about here. I mean, our debates here are shockingly bad as well. They are mudslinging. They are falsely defending records. So our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, in his debates, he's looking at Labour and saying, you're going to have the border open, you're going to bring all and sundry into the country, while he oversaw the biggest illegal immigration numbers and actually literally in the history of Great Britain, and now he's throwing mud at Labour saying you're going to let in all these immigrants. I mean, we are being taken for fools, and actually part of me blames us for tolerating it. Why do we tolerate lies? Why are we attracted to lies? Why do we want to hear a comfortable lie rather than the truth? Haven't we realized that the lie ultimately is going to create a much worse life for us than an uncomfortable truth? Don't we understand that in order to improve our situation, we have to confront the truths about it? But we don't. We are comforted by the lie. And that lie is spiraling and getting us into more and more and more trouble. I guess it's a human thing. We humans behave like this all over the world. I want the truth. I have always wanted the truth. To get religious about it, I'm not a particularly religious person, as you know. I'm agnostic, but I do believe that lying is evil. The devil has been described as the prince of lies, if I'm correct. I think that's inaccurate, if there is such a thing.
And the father of lies.
As a satanic force, a Satan. The prince of lies is is a perfect a name for him, because that is evil. I'm not talking about little white lies that we all tell. I'm talking about enormous untruths that affect millions and millions of lives, and we tolerate it and we find comfort in it. Why are we a question that plagues me is, why is humanity so adverse to the truth?
Well, that's a great stopping point for this first segment. We're going to go now to a commercial break, which in fact is an ad for your book, which we again assume did well on its release on July 4th. And when we come back, we'll dig into that aspect of truth and go from there. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Anne-Marie Waters on the Created in the Image of God show.
To protect our way of life. In Defense of Democracy, Anne-Marie Waters invites you to look beyond the surface and explore its real essence. We often equate it with the act of voting, but is voting alone enough? Waters argues that voting is just one aspect of a broader concept. True freedom involves free speech, universal suffrage, an honest press, and an accountable government. Through detailed analysis, she challenges us to recognize movements that appear democratic but threaten our true democratic principles. In Defense of Democracy offers a profound exploration of what makes our political system more than just a voting process. Discover the truth behind our freedoms. Get your copy today.
Now, after that ad for Anne-Marie's book, with the author herself, Anne-Marie. Welcome back, Anne-Marie.
Hi, Wade. Thank you.
So right before the break, we were talking about truth and about how to be a successful politician, maybe you have to be an adept liar, and how the population maybe doesn't want the truth. You know, Jack Nicholson, of course, springs to mind, and his iconic line, "You can't handle the truth." But what I want to dig into here is a Baha'i principle for our Baha'i friends in the audience, which is the first principle that Abdul-Baha mentioned, the son of Baha'u'llah, which is the independent investigation of truth or of reality lies at the basis of this, which is interesting in the context of religion because, you know, in the book of Hebrews, the faith chapter, it says, faith is the evidence of things not seen. And yet here we're talking about, no, you must investigate reality and independently do so. Your faith must be brought into alignment with the will of God as expressed in his creation. So I like to term that there's the book of Revelation, which is the holy writings, but then there's the greater book of Revelation, which is the creation itself, the universe, everything that we can see, taste, touch, feel. That is where and Einstein said, I want to know the thoughts of God, the rest is details, right? So how do we move forward as a species from this juncture in which we like being lied to, and we go along with it to our own destruction?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure of the answer to that. I don't think there is one. I don't think we will do that. I think, sadly, we are going to walk off a cliff rather than just look at the 20th century. You know, the 1914, we engaged in the bloodiest war until that point. And if you look at what happened in France and Belgium, on the front lines in France and Belgium, 1 million soldiers slaughtered over a few feet of land. And at the end, and nothing, there's no, I mean, you look at the First World War and you think, what was it even about? Big powers beating their chests and trying to out-ego each other, and for that millions of people died in horrific circumstances. And then after that, a few years down the line, a couple of decades down the line, we did it again, only worse. So and that was based on lies and cheating and egos. And even look at Adolf Hitler. Look what he did. He persuaded the German people, for example, that the tiny number of Jews that lived among them were responsible for all their problems. He persuaded them of that. A country of 80 million people, he persuaded them of that through propaganda and through lies and through evil, the practice of evil. And look where it led to. It led to the Holocaust. It led to the bloodiest war we'd ever seen, just years after the previous bloodiest war we'd ever seen. So I'm not sure we do have, sadly. I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist. I like humans. I do. I think we're pretty good creatures. I think we're kinder than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. But I think we're frightened. We're fearful. Humans are full of fear. And I think an answer to my own question, why are people adverse to the truth, is because they're afraid of the truth. If I try to tell people what goes on in some parts of our country, I try to tell them that we have, for example, Sharia law and practiced in this country. And I try to tell them that people are given death sentences in Sharia courts. We call them honor killings, but they are passed in Sharia courts in this country. They don't believe me. And for years, I traveled around the country speaking about this issue and trying to warn the British people of the presence of Sharia law within their country. They simply didn't believe me. And it doesn't matter how much evidence you show them, they won't believe it. They'll say, that can't be happening here. That can't be happening. This is the UK. That can't be happening. But it was happening. And that refusal to face that harsh reality is more comforting to them now. The problem is that that refusal is going to take them spiraling further and further into what I can only describe as a hellish situation. Sectarianism, violence, segregation. This country is rampant with segregation and sectarianism. And you can see it now with the general election as well. All the parties are trying to appeal to different ethnic groups, and it's incredible to watch. And it's all of what I have been speaking about for years, I and others have been warning about for years, is playing out. We are an increasingly fractured society. There are large sections of our large cities where people don't speak English, where they don't mix. We have areas where white people don't dare go. It's, you know, it's true. But if you tell people this, they think you're a far-right racist fascist, and they don't want to hear it. And it's easier for them to characterize you as some immoral racist than it is to accept that I might be telling the truth. So I'm not sure that we are going to recover from our adversity to truth. We will walk off a cliff instead, I think, sadly.
Well, one of the, to me, great ironic hypocrisies is those who paint themselves as the great tolerant ones are so quick to demonize and other their opponents.
Absolutely.
Right? And nobody can call out that that particular emperor is not dressed, right? So I want to just pivot slightly now, because you're Irish originally, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, not only originally, I assume still are somewhere, right?
Well, I was born there, grew up in Dublin, so I've still got the accent, sort of.
And one great fellow countryman of yours, William Butler Yeats, when you started talking about World War I, you know, one of my all-time favorite poems, because it is so profoundly prophetic and so powerful, is The Second Coming, written in the aftermath of the First World War. I'm going to go ahead and read it for the sake of our audience and everyone, to sort of
I look forward
lend the weight of historical perspective to what you were saying about World War I, and fighting over, you know, a little tract of land and, you know, inches in a trench war and millions dying. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Now, I've founded something called the Royal Falcon Foundation, not because of this, but that resonates. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Now, how prophetic is that when it comes to politics, right? And you talked about sectarianism. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with a lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Such a profound prophetic analysis. And here we are, one world war later, and many feel, you know, we've been on the verge of a third world war for many decades, but it seems closer than ever. Whatever happened to that doomsday clock? Where is it now?
Do you think it is close?
Well, I do, but it is all because of the denial, all because people will not reflect on reality, all because people don't want the truth.
Right.
They, you know, they're hiding and denying and turning and averting their eyes in every way. And, you know, it's my position that the divine guidance, as evidenced by the first book of the Bible, Genesis, was God put the greater and lesser lights in heaven to rule the day and to rule the night. In broad daylight, it's harder to hide from the light. It's harder to, you know, hide those lies in the crevices because the daylight is shining everywhere. But at night, by the light of the moon, that's when that beast can be born. And if everyone's denying the truth, you know, darkness has descended because people refuse to accept the reality of everything around them. They're covering their heads and not wanting to know. And anyone who does point out the truth is called a conspiracy theorist of some sort or another.
Yeah, that's pretty much perfect. What's the name of that poem, Wade? I'm going to have to read.
It's called
that.
The Second Coming.
Second Coming, W.B. Yeats. Okay, I'm going to read that and study it a little bit. But you know what you've said is perfectly true. It is, we are turning away from truth, and it is going to hurtle us into hell, I think. As for a third world war, I you know, Donald Trump is warning about it, and you know, I think with Ukraine,
and others are saying he will cause it, right? And that's a typical thing.
Right.
Often, you know, kill the messenger, kill the messenger. Isn't that throughout human history a fact?
Right. I mean,
whoever brings the message gets blamed for this reality. Right?
I've personally experienced that. I mean, I've described it as you're standing in a room and a monster comes into the room, and you try to tell everybody, look, there's a monster in the room, and they start throwing things at you for telling them there's a monster in the room. And that's exactly what has happened to me and many other people. Donald Trump isn't going to cause that war. This what's happening with Ukraine, and if I don't think they will let Ukraine join NATO, because that immediately brings NATO to war with Russia.
But of course there was, and you know, I want to remind people there was already the Budapest Memorandum signed by Great Britain, America, and Russia, in which the Ukraine voluntarily gave up its nuclear weapons during the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the Budapest Memorandum documented that you know, Great Britain, America, and Russia would come to the Ukraine's defense in the event that there was some, you know, infringement of their sovereignty. Well, lo and behold, where is that memorandum today to talk about lies, right?
Well, I'm kind of glad that America's not going directly into war with Russia. We'd be in big trouble. But it worries me that it is fighting Russia by proxy. That worries me. It worries me that we're all fighting. I mean, Britain is also giving weapons to Ukraine. Ironically, though, I think that actually the weapons that we have today are probably preventing war. And you know, there is truth to the notion that weapons of mass destruction would actually prevent war. I think there's truth to that. I don't, you know, first to go to a World War II type scenario would quickly spiral and quickly escalate to nuclear weapons, I think, because these things get out of control. You know, there's a spiral, isn't there? It's like a snowball. If we started fighting with conventional weapons, someone at some point is going to do something outrageous, and these things spiral out of all control, and then you're looking at nuclear war. Who wants that? Genuinely, who wants that?
Well, I think
there may be some psychopath, but I think it's actually preventing war at this time. And
I don't disagree. One of my sound bites that I like to share is if you cannot be a good example, you can at least serve as a horrifying warning, right? And there are deterrents, there are historical precedents that are forcing people to be a little bit awake and not only woke about what is going on. We're going to go to another commercial break here at the end of this segment, and when we come back, we'll go a little further with this. I do want to, before I forget, let everybody know there is just an excellent documentary series on Netflix right now. I just watched all the episodes about nuclear weapons, and it's I don't know if it's 9-10 segments of an hour long each, and it talks about the rise of nuclear weapons and how they dominated geopolitics for many decades, and where we're at now, the rise of Putin in Russia. It's just an excellent overview. I lived through some of those things, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the wall. It covers all of that ground and how the Cold War emerged because of that deterrence, right? You couldn't really fight a war. And so you had this détente, this forced peace for many decades that is now falling apart. I strongly urge anyone who's interested in getting a little deeper on these topics to revisit that history if you know it, or learn it if you don't, by watching that excellent series. So we'll go now to a commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what's next for Anne-Marie, her writing, and draw tonight's show to a conclusion. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Overwhelmed by the confusion and chaos of today's world. Politics, the media, and even the environment have become increasingly challenging landscapes to navigate. We're living in a narrative that began 4 decades ago, and now we're reaching its climax. What the hell is going on is here to provide clarity and perspective. Don't get triggered by another tweet or misled by clickbait ads. Gain a deeper understanding and grasp the broader picture. Understanding is powerful. When we comprehend the news in context, we can see through the sensationalism and misinformation. Get insight and clarity by discovering what the hell is going on post-COVID. Cowan's insightful and well-researched work will help you navigate the complexities of today's world. Order your copy today.
Of God show. I'm your host, Wade Franson. I'm here with Anne-Marie Waters, who's become a dear friend over the years, and I'm just really thoroughly enjoying this conversation with her, covering a vast array of topics. But what I want to go into next is your writing. Obviously, you've written and published 2 books that have done quite well. I mentioned in the sneak peek, your first book, Beyond Terror, became the number 1 mover and shaker in Australia on Amazon, which means the hottest selling new book across all Amazon. And it did very, very well in many other countries as well. But you've been involved more in writing. So tell us a little bit about the kind of writing you're doing, what you're writing about, why you're focused on writing.
I want to become I want to become the best writer I can be. So a friend of mine has a company in New York that writes news for subscription sites. I needed a job. He offered me one, and it's been the most incredible learning journey. I write about American politics every day. I know the American system inside out and upside down now. I feel like I've gotten to know America very well in the last, I've been doing it a couple of years now, and I feel like I've gotten to know America very well. I've not been since 2019, so I think it's time. I think it's time for a trip. But yeah, I simply want to express myself, as we all do, and I want to be the best writer I can be. So this work that I'm doing has been a godsend, and I'm really, really grateful for it and really enjoying it. And American politics and American life is very exciting. It really is. It really is the most extraordinary country. I love it very, very dearly. And that's another aspect that I love about this job is knowing America and getting to know America. And I've also learned how to, I learned the differences in English, American English and British English, which we get so much American English here from books and TV. And so a lot of people say, is that a Z or an S? Which most people don't know which is the British and which is the American, because we're so intertwined. I've learned that now. I write in American English now.
Well,
so
Winston Churchill, of course, two people separated by a common language, right? But I remember when my first visit as a young adult to the UK, I'd been there before, but I was like in my college career, I was like 19, and I was staying with this family for the summer while working on a college exchange summer program. And there was little Maveen, who was about 3 years old, 3.5, and they had their little dog Skipper. And we walked to the I came home from my my job. And Maven was, would you like to go with us to the park to walk Skipper? And I said, oh, yes, please. I just need to change my pants. And not to give the punchline away, Maven did this little 3-year-old Maven did this and said, Daddy, he said he had to change his pants. Now, what was she talking about?
Well, of course, pants are underwear here.
Right. So why did this, Maven knew why she sometimes had to change her pants as a 3-year-old. But why did this college, man need to change his pants?
Well,
right?
Why did he need to tell a 3-year-old? I think that's the part that you found strange.
Perhaps, yeah. No one else had ever admitted that they had to change their pants. I thought I was the only one.
Yes. There
Anyway,
are some funny little bits.
Yeah. So, well, speaking of those little differences, let's talk about some larger differences. Let's talk about the manufacturing of grievances, because you're writing, and I recently read an article you wrote for the Atlantic Playbook. Little plug here. I think we're going to show an ad that we may have even shown an ad for the Atlantic Playbook, which you and some other authors for Something or Other Publishing have been invited to write in. And anyway, the article you wrote had to do with race, right? And one of the topics that's fascinated me is how grievance is being manufactured in this country. It's being turned into an industry. Now, I've founded the Royal Falcon Foundation, as I mentioned earlier, and we do what's something called experiential leadership for 11 to 15-year-olds. And what the theme of this year's camp program is, be the change you want to see in the world. This is an old school, old time saying, going back to, before Michael Jackson saying, the man in the mirror, I'm looking at the man in the mirror, right? Be the change you want to see. Well, that's been turned on its head, right? It's find somebody else you can blame for what's wrong.
Yes.
And blame them for things not being right. It's no longer about what are you doing about it. Well, what I'm doing about it is protesting and demanding that these evil people change, demonizing other people. And honestly, at the bottom of this is Marxist ideology, in which previously class differences were exploited to foment division and discontent, and in order to overthrow the government and replace it with a different government and a different philosophy. But that no longer worked when people realized there is social mobility in most of the capitalist nations. And by engaging in a desire to improve your situation, you could become one of the, one of the privileged people if you worked hard enough. And of course, there's some limitations to that. I'm not going to say it's not, much more difficult for some people in some circumstances, and there aren't residual barriers and whatnot. But overall, people realize that's a crock of what, and actually, I'm not going to buy that. I'm not buying what they're selling anymore. However, by inserting race into that, it's something you cannot change. You cannot change your race. So if you can convince people that they're being held back because of their race, now you can really manufacture a grievance industry. And nobody's trying now to be the change because they think it's impossible to change anything, because in fact, it's based on race and they can't change their race. So all of this, and I thought you articulated this and more so well in that article. So unpack a little bit the article, why you wrote it and what you said in it. And this, by the way, this gets back to the main topic here, in case people are wondering why I'm getting into this. And that is denying reality, twisting reality, wanting to believe a lie.
So that is the article that anti-whiteness will hasten America's end. That article.
I think so. Yes, that was it.
You are entirely right to say that this is Marxism. This is Marxism, communism, whichever way you want to describe it. What you have are communist Marxist activists taking control of public bodies, education system, for example, the Democrat Party. So taking control of influential institutions. What was named in Germany in the 1960s as the Long March through the institutions, which is a way of controlling society without having to win an election. So they take control of, for example, the Labour Party here, the Democrats in the US, the education system here, the education system in the US, in order to change society beyond all recognition. They have to do that, they have to make people angry. And to make people angry, they have to feed them what they believe, what the person on the receiving end of the message believes is a moral cause. So if you take, for example, the George Floyd scenario, now they made the Marxists in society made people believe that essentially that the American police, that American police all over the US are essentially going out and just killing black people. Just killing black people. That is, to listen to the media, you would almost believe that that's what was happening, that they almost target black people. So they persuaded millions of people all over the world, thousands of them went out to march and cause chaos, that they were marching for black people to be treated better. Now, you cannot, anyone who stood up and said, hold on a minute, it's not true that American police just go out and randomly shoot black people. Let's not just buy that. Let's look at it a little bit better. They gave statistics such as the black people are disproportionately represented in American prisons. This was immediately assigned to racism. It was racist. The American system was racist. That's why there were more black people, disproportionately high number of black people in prison. When anyone suggested that there may be higher numbers of black people in prison because of higher levels of crime in black communities, they were shot down, when actually statistics bear that out. So your question isn't, the assumption isn't, or assumption shouldn't be, that the American judicial system is racist. It should be, why is there disproportionately high levels of crime in black communities? No one wants to hear that. That's the question.
The scientific method tests a hypothesis. It's a valid hypothesis that it could be racism, right? But the scientific method tests the hypothesis. What goes under the name of social science is in these days, the twisted proving of a false hypothesis.
Yeah, they won't test it. They won't look at it at all. And anyone who dares to say or suggest that actually maybe it's not racism, maybe there's another reason, but they can't look at that because they want it to be racism. It has to be racism for them to make people angry, to sell a widespread injustice. They want people angry. They want people to bring down the system. So they have to persuade them of widespread racial injustice. Critical race theory is an enormous part of this. And then you've got a huge problem in America with critical race theory. It is teaching children from a young age in school that America is an inherently unjust country and that whites are inherently bad people, that just by being white you are a racist. Therefore they turn black against white in every circumstance because they want to cause chaos and bring the system down.
Critical race theory is a racist ideology,
of course,
that is supported and defended by accusing anyone who's against it of being a racist.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Race relations have never, in my lifetime, race relations in this country have never been as bad as they are now. I actually hear people say, which I never thought I would hear, I hear people say, I just avoid. So if it's a white person, I've heard a couple of white people say, I just avoid black people now. You know, I had never thought I would hear that, but people are becoming open saying it now. I'm not going to bother mixing with other racial groups now. It's too much trouble. You're walking on eggshells all the time. You know, I've lost friends. I had, when I was at university 20 so years ago, my flatmate was a British Indian girl. We were best friends. Now she doesn't talk to me because of my political, you know, it's that would never have happened even a decade ago, where interracial friendships are breaking down. Politics saturates everything. It influences everything. just as it does in communist societies. That's the point. You know, this is where we're heading. Everything is such. I've seen families not stop speaking to each other over politics. That has never happened before. And you sort of, people lower their voices too. You know, if someone's talking about immigration, they don't even raise their voices. It reminds me of a friend of mine from Poland who remembers when that country was under communism and how people would have to, if adults wanted to talk about current affairs, she said they would go into the back garden and turn on a radio and speak to each other behind, you know, sort of not drowned out, the sound drowned out by the radio. That's almost, you know, that's almost where we are now. We speak in hushed tones, friendships break down, families are breaking down all over politics. It's never been like this. And the racial divide and racial tension, I've just never known anything like it. It's real, it's evident in everyday life now. It's working. The race grievance industry pushed by Marxists to separate us, to make us angry, to make us distrustful is working wonderfully in your country and in mine. Specifically English-speaking countries are particularly bad. Europe is pretty bad, but not as bad as this. The English-speaking world is really in a dangerous place.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting that you mention the language, and I think the word, right? And again, to me, to bring it sort of back home to this show, the word of God is the solution, in my view. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. It was with God, and the Word was God. The Word, the creative Word, the Creator spoke it, and it was so. He said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So the words and the language that have been used, the way in which terms have been redefined. Pandemic also comes to mind, another facet of this, in which the definition of vaccine was changed over the course of rolling out a supposed vaccine that has been scientifically shown to not have been a vaccine at all by the original definition of vaccine, which was extant when it was rolled out. But when the reality didn't conform, then you just changed the word.
Right. Right. Clever, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing how that works. So it's interesting that you mentioned English language. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms before, but I suspect that's completely true. We're gonna now go to our final commercial break. We're gonna also look at audience comments. This is a pre-recorded show, but I hope that there's been robust conversation. We're going to give away a copy or copies of Anne-Marie's books to those who have been hopefully commenting. And even though I didn't do it in the pre-recorded, I will have said it live on the show. So I'm now a prophet, like peering into the future of what's actually happening 2 weeks from now when the show airs. But when we come back, I'd like to just conclude with you sharing, your thesis and the conclusion of your book, because the point of having this interview at this time was the release of the paperback and Kindle of In Defense of Democracy. So when we come back from this brief ad, which will be about next week's guest, I'm going to wrap this up with Anne-Marie and have her share the premise and conclusion of her book. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the last few precious minutes of having Anne-Marie Waters in the studio. Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. Right before the break, I said we'll wrap this up with some thoughts around Anne-Marie's book. So what I wanted to do, though, was remind us all of your origin story, which we didn't really do tonight because you've been on the show before. And that is, prior to becoming a politician and then an ex-politician, you were a barrister, you were an attorney, a lawyer. And how did that training help you with the kind of clarity and logic that I constantly am amazed at when I hear you speak?
Well, I trained as a lawyer originally, and I did three degrees of sorts. The first one I did was journalism, broadcasting. That was my first degree, and that taught me that teaches you to speak very clearly. You're doing radio and television a lot, so that teaches you to speak. After that, I did a law degree, and I trained as a lawyer. I did mostly family law at the University of Law in London. It obviously, I believe in education for its own sake, but by the time I got to the end of the beginning, if you like, of my legal career, I learned about Sharia law, and I learned about the Sharia networks, the network of Sharia courts in Great Britain. And that took me down a road I did not expect to go down, because then I used my legalese to campaign. I got involved in various anti-Sharia campaigns, gave legal advice to various people. It was wonderful. I mean, it's crazy when I look back sometimes. I mean, I was involved in smuggling women out of Saudi Arabia. You know, this is crazy. There are underground networks that get women out of Saudi Arabia and try to, you know, if they're under threat of being killed by their families. It's just been such a crazy, crazy long journey. But my opposition to Sharia law led me down a road that I read the Quran, I studied the Hadiths, I studied Islam very, very intensely for some time, and became very involved, more and more involved in speaking out about Islam. Again, I just wanted people to tell the truth. I just wanted people to know. What they did with that truth was up to them. But we cannot find a solution to something if we don't admit what the problem is. So I spent years traveling around the country telling people about Sharia law and about Islam and about the dangers it was presenting in our country and presents around the world. It got me into a lot of trouble. But I don't think I'd have been able to do it if I hadn't been trained as a lawyer, because it teaches you how to think, how to spot flaws in other people's arguments. It teaches you how to articulate an argument, how to speak with clarity and confidence. I wouldn't have been able to go on that long journey if I hadn't trained as a lawyer. I don't think it gave me that ability to shape arguments in a very clear way, which is what a lawyer does. So I'm very grateful for it, even though I never really practiced as you know. I was clerking, and I clerked in the Old Bailey in London, which was such an amazing time. I don't know if you know, the Old Bailey is it's not got a legal seniority, but it's such a famous court that whenever anything major happens, they will be tried in the Old Bailey just for the status of it. Doesn't matter where it happened. It could happen up here in the north of England. It will still be tried in the Old Bailey just for the grandeur of it. For example, things like the Yorkshire Ripper. He did his murders. Obviously, he was a serial killer in Yorkshire in the 80s. He did all his murders in Yorkshire, which is in the north of England. They tried him in the Old Bailey because it was such a spectacle. So things like that, major crimes. So I clerked there for a while. It was such an amazing experience. It's so historic, such a beautiful building, old oak panels. It's been the scene of great criminal trials throughout British history. Wonderful. I've had a wonderful time. I really have. I've had a wonderful time. Yeah.
So that background then helped you form the premise to dare to write a book called In Defense of Democracy. So what was the basic, I mean, obviously there was a lot of analysis of what's going on. What was the basic premise and the conclusion, and perhaps any ray of hope on the horizon to actually defend democracy instead of just using it as a shell game, a red herring to try to get elected by claiming your opponent is seeking to destroy it?
Yeah. I mean, at the heart of democracy, of course, is truth. We have to, you know, the method we use to select our leaders is election on election time. That's not democracy itself, though. That's just one minuscule way of choosing who leads us. Democracy is truth. It is a candidate who stands for election must be able to communicate with the electorate. That's the core of it. What we have now is a filter a dishonest media, which has the credibility of the media has collapsed in the last decade or so. Absolutely.
So the fourth estate, as it's called here in America, has become a fifth column.
Absolutely.
I.e. a traitorous organization. And ultimately, it would seem that it is you and I. It is the population who votes who must become the change they want to see in the world. If we want to save democracy, we have to get serious about being open-minded about the truth, search out the facts, demand honesty and integrity from our journalists, and then perform the effort, go do the work of investigating reality, and then make an informed choice.
Right. That's what we need to do. That is exactly it. We have to go out and cast our ballot based on fact and not on media spin. Now, and for some time now, that is exactly what we've been doing. And the media, to me, the media is the dark heart in the cultural collapse of the Western world. It is the primary cause of it, because it is what informs people. And if people are wrongly informed, they make bad decisions. And we are wrongly informed and we are making bad decisions. And I blame the media overwhelmingly for that. The media has caused the downfall, the imminent downfall, or potential imminent downfall of Western civilization. It is no less serious than that. The media is causing it.
Wow. I did not in any way intend this to be self-congratulatory, but I'm basking now in the joy of having had you on this show and doing my minuscule little part at presenting information, presenting discussion, presenting media to people who, what we're doing here is different. What we're doing here is an open discussion without trying to sway opinion or, create sound bites or appeal to an echo chamber. You and I have differences, and yet this has been just an amazing conversation in which there are, I think, valid conclusions that you and I and anyone watching can come to in terms of what we should do, how we should view things, maybe be a little bit more open-minded to this and that, investigate some of these things as to whether or not they be true. There's a verse in the Bible which says the Bereans were more honorable. They searched the scriptures daily to see whether these things were true or not.
If only we would do searching daily to see whether things were true or not. But we won't. And the dishonest, they rely on that fact.
Some will, and I bet there are those in the comments right now who are acknowledging this and hopefully pledging, yes, let's become an army of people who are insisting on getting to the bottom of things and searching out the facts. Let's be positive on that. Despite the storm clouds and WB Yeats and the slouching towards Babylon and all that stuff. What a pleasure to have you here, Anne-Marie. We will have you back to continue following you on your journey, and thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean that.
We'll be right back, or actually, I don't know if we're going anywhere, or I'm just shifting now towards discussing comments to make sure that some of the people in the audience get a book. Anyway, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Wade.
Challenges, one platform stands ready to confront them head-on. Introducing Atlantic Playbook, a beacon of insight in a sea of uncertainty. Founded by Chadwick Hagan, Atlantic Playbook explores the complexities of Western economies and ideologies after years of research and dedication. Join us as we uncover the truth and dissect these challenges, from media distrust to political battles. Subscribe to Atlantic Playbook today and navigate our world with clarity and knowledge.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I just played that ad for Chad Hagan's Atlantic Playbook. We actually had Chad in the studio here, ready to join me in discussing some of the audience comments. Anne-Marie Waters, among other things, writes articles for Chadwick Hagan's Atlantic Playbook, including some of the topics that she covered tonight. Because Anne-Marie is in Great Britain, and this was pre-recorded, And because I was having technical difficulties, my system was shutting down, but I have it on good authority that the audience was able to follow the show, which was pre-recorded mostly, even though I was getting kicked out of the studio, and so was Chad. So Chad's gone now too. But I will just bring out a couple of comments so that we can share some of them, because as you know, we stream on multiple platforms. Not everybody sees the comments. Sad but true, game show hosts. That was one comment about our recent campaign. The point of talking about our, not the campaign, but the recent debate, the point of talking about this is to really encourage all of us to take a step back from our preconceived ideas, our preconceived notions, and dig deeper. We are in need of change. And as Anne-Marie was so carefully and thoughtfully pointing out, that change will come as we become more open to the truth, to the investigation of reality, to seeing things through our own eyes and not through the eyes of others. Journalism, and to refer back again to a Baha'i quote, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, actually revealed a tablet, as it's called, directed at the journalists, directed at the phenomenon of newspapers that was emerging. And he said, this is a good thing if these newspapers accurately report on the facts. So we must demand it. We must stop listening, consuming, in that sense, paying for and supporting this kind of divisive narrative, some of which was being talked about today in the show tonight. Here's a comment from Sienna, who is a podcaster in her own right. Thank you for joining tonight. Lies are rooted in materialism, such as the material reality of one's skin color. Skin color is the least of all distinctions, according to Abdul-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, the least of all distinctions. We need diversity, not just of skin color, but diversity of thought, of temperament, and the ability to work with people who think differently than us. Thank you for this comment, Sienna. In the second half, we are noble spiritual beings, hopefully called to ascend beyond that reality. Well said. There was a comment towards the end about the media and what's going on out there. Same here. I don't listen to most of them anymore. Well, I just want to thank you all for tuning into this show and listening in. We will have Anne-Marie back. We'll also have Chad Hagen back, but we'll also focus on the core topic of religion and its role in society. And so it is that next week we have a very special guest. My remaining task tonight is to announce that guest, Mark Collins. Mark Collins is an author and the creator of Life Mastery. He has dedicated over a decade to helping Christian men overcome fear and imposter syndrome. Through his Bible-based course and book, Collins provides the tools needed to unleash your full potential and live a life of purpose and design through God. So I look very much forward to next week when we will have Mark Collins on the show. And allow me just to play a quick video by way of introducing him to this audience. And we'll conclude with that video. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you here next week, 8 p.m. Central Time, for episode 108 with Mark Collins on the Created in the Image of God show. Good night, everyone, and God bless.
Where you are unstoppable, where confidence radiates in every situation. Welcome to Life Mastery, Life by Design, by Mark Collins, an instruction manual for true freedom. There is a life God created you to live, one where fear does not influence your decisions, one where you unleash everything that is inside you. Life Mastery provides the tools to become unstoppable. With straightforward language, empowering tools, and fresh insights, you will be able to immediately implement the change you want in your life. Transform your life today. Discover Life Mastery. Life by Design by Mark Collins. Now available on Amazon.